I will remember the minutes tonight. I'm working hard. All right, everybody's got your packets, right? Fairly lengthy. Mary? Oh. All right.
My name is Mary Wright. I am Director of Operations for the district. On behalf of Dr. Helm, who will be joining us shortly, I'd like to welcome everybody. Committee members, welcome back. Thanks for all the hard work Tuesday, and we're back at it again tonight, so we appreciate you committing your time and effort and helping us come to some good decisions. For those of you in the audience, we are glad that you could join us and see the work in progress. So hope you are comfortable and can see on the monitor or have, if you have questions, you can submit those to Let's Talk. But again, we're glad that you're here participating in the process. And with no further ado, because I know we have a lot to accomplish tonight, I will turn it back over to Mr. Stein and let the committee get started.
Thank you, Mary. First things first. Everybody has the minutes in front of you. You received them. Any additions, changes, or corrections? I'll give you a minute or two. Did turn your phones off. I said mostly to myself. Chair will entertain a motion to accept. Thank you. Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Quick review of the agenda and our plans tonight. At our last meeting, we put together an elementary school plan that we think, given the guiding principles with which we were working, is pretty close. We have, the committee has taken a look at a couple of small issues where we moved some folks who were actually within walking distance of the school in question, so we may be tweaking it slightly, but by and large, this is the that we hope to move forward with. And tonight's goal is to have asked all the committee members to take out their guiding principles that we were charged to follow by the school board. And I am hopeful that we'll be able to examine this elementary school map through, within context and through the prism of these new guiding principles. And after that, we may or may not be doing a little more tweaking, or a lot, who knows. So tonight's discussion is an important one. It's one that I believe is where, I called it in our earlier meeting, sort of the gristle of where we are in this process. We need to make sure that we are doing what our bosses, the school board, asked us to do. And so tonight is when we should have real and candid conversations about how this committee of 22 people really think about what the priorities are. So I'm asking all to be candid, forceful, but civil and respectful and professional as we go through tonight's conversation. I will tell you that we have been planning, this is for the public, we have been planning a couple of public forums, tentatively scheduled originally for January 27th. We've been unable to locate a venue, so we have rescheduled the first of those two public forums. The first one will be at Bryan Station High School on February the 12th, which I believe is a Thursday. Is that right, Lisa? And we hope to follow that up with our very next meeting at Tate's Creek. Okay, at Tate's Creek High School on Tuesday the 16th. So they'll be back
That would be
17th. Okay.
Monday, President's Day.
Oh, that's right. Okay, the 17th.
No,
So,
16th. It would be on the holiday,
oh,
which is Monday the 16th.
that's when the school's available?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a change. It'll be on Monday the 16th, so the 12th and the 16th.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and at opposite ends of town, so that we have the ability to make sure that everybody who can come will to those sessions. At our next meeting, we'll announce the full February schedule, which I'm hopeful will get us to some stopping points at the end of this process. Our accelerated pace has finally kind of hit us. Some folks have had vacations or other trips planned, and so we're down 3 of our committee members tonight. One, though, is being replaced. Drew McAllister. McClellan. And I knew that. Is sitting in for Mike Cravens, who is a representative of the Home Builders Association. So, Drew, welcome. We're glad you're here. Based on our rules, you can take notes, etc., but no voting privilege. Okay, so, Lisa, what did I miss?
Well, did the committee discuss a time for the forum? Would you like to do 6 to 8?
Yeah, that's a good point. Many parents have suggested to us that those listening opportunities on February 12th and 16th at 4 or 4:30 are inconvenient, so we're going to do them both from 6 to 8.
Yes.
Okay.
And do you want us to explain anything that's in your packet today?
Well, there's a lot of stuff in your packet. This is far and away the largest Let's Talk scenario. If you don't have anything to do for an hour or two tonight, when you get home, you ought to read every word of it.
And there are 3 parts to it. The first part is just the feedback. Several people had attachments to their feedback, and that's the second packet that's right behind it that has all the attachment numbers in it. It starts with 2 little girls with backpacks on. And then one of the Let's Talk comments was a suggested article for you all, and so we printed that, and that is also in your color. It's also a color section. So when you look through your packet, you've got Let's Talk, and then the very next thing after Let's Talk is, so you've got Let's Talk, you've got the first set of attachments, and then you've got the article that the person wanted you all to have. And then there were 2 written comments left for you on the board over there last time, and those are right here.
You sent an email to the committee?
Yeah.
The committee got it, that was not copied.
Right.
Me?
Right.
Your email?
Yeah, the research that we sent. We need, Lisa,
Yes, sir.
I would like to make the research that Astari distributed today,
Yes, sir.
I would like that to be available online for anybody to take a look at.
Certainly.
We all got it late this afternoon.
Do you all want paper copies right now for yourselves? Or,
I don't think, did everybody get it? Oh, well, why not? Did everybody over here get it? Yeah, you know, Melissa, I think you're the only one.
I'm sorry, Melissa.
Yeah,
so then no paper copies right now?
yeah, none right now. What we're talking about is some research that we requested to be done as to the impact, positive or negative, about socioeconomic diversity in schools, if it helped or did not help in raising achievement across the board. So we found some of that research. Sorry, was able to find it and distribute it to our committee. It's all very interesting reading, and I recommend that it be available to everybody to take a look at. I think with that,
Do you need any explanation of this in response to the request for other
well,
data?
everybody has this. Is this available for the public to see
We
anyway?
wanted the committee to take a look at it first.
Do what?
We wanted the committee to have that.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, maybe you could explain what we've got here
Okay.
a little more easily than I might. This is also some research that we asked to be done. We just talked about the articles that Asari has distributed, but it's all, that's more theoretical and in other locations around the country. So I asked for some actual local data that would link one way or the other socioeconomic diversity with our own local schools' achievements. And this is what we came up with.
Okay, so on this chart, this is just for elementary and middle schools because that's what we had available. I'm sorry, we had a one-day turnaround. The first, I'll walk you through what the first column entails, and so that'll help you to understand how to read the chart. In Kentucky, you may know that 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders are tested annually in reading and math. So if you look at the first column and the first row, that's Arlington. Of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders who were tested in 2011-12, 93.8% of those children qualified for free and reduced lunch. Skip the ranking for now. The next column has the percent free and reduced lunch, proficient and distinguished in reading. So what we did in that first column, that the numbers are actually 152 children out of 162 children tested qualified for free and reduced lunch. Of those 152 children who qualify for free and reduced lunch, 23.7% of them earn proficient or distinguished marks in reading. And then if you jump over one more column, 16.4% of the children who qualified for free and reduced lunch earned proficient or distinguished in math. And so that's for 2011-12, then we did that for 2012-13, and for 2013-14. I think that one of the committee members had asked us to go back 10 years. The test changed 3 years ago, and so this is the 3 years of comparable data on the same test that we had available. What we did then was, oh, okay, I thought you were making a comment here. What we did then was we looked at, we just ranked them from highest to lowest. So there are 45 schools, and so you'll see that for the purposes of keeping it the same, green is so matches your charts that we've already done, and I apologize, Ron, we're going to come up with a different color scheme for you.
I can see this.
Okay. Green means a lower percentage of free and reduced lunch, and red means a higher percentage of free and reduced lunch. So Arlington is the 40th out of 45 schools with the highest percentage of free and reduced lunch, and Wellington is the 9th out of 45 schools in terms of percentages of free and reduced lunch. So that's what that ranking means. And then we went through and we ranked each of those columns distinctly. So we ranked the performance of the free and reduced lunch children in reading, in math for those 2 years, and then we jumped the same way through the whole chart. Then what we did was we set some cut points. As you know, our district, as an overall, is roughly 50% free and reduced lunch. So any school that was 50% or less free and reduced lunch is colored green. Any school that is 60% or more is colored red. So that's what the red and green means in that column that just tells you about the demographics. And remember, this is not the demographics of the whole school. This is just the demographics of the children tested, because we wanted to be sure we were looking at how the low-income children who were tested did on those tests. So we were very specific about using the right data for you. Then what we did was we looked at performance. Any school where less than a third of the children who qualify for free and reduced lunch earned proficient or distinguished marks is colored in red. Any school where 45% or more earned proficient or distinguished marks are in green. So those are the cut points for performance. I'll go to those again.
Can I interrupt just for a second? I'm sorry. But when you mention demographics, please remember that that is of the students attending the school. When we're looking at the demographics, we're looking at the students residing in the area. Just at the
Thank you, Scott. Ron, did you have a question?
I wanted you to repeat those cut points.
Okay. So for the purposes of demographics, 50% and lower is green, 60% and higher is red. For performance, 33% and lower is red, 45% and higher is green. And so visually, this shows you the relationship. We also ran a mathematical analysis, and many of you are familiar with the term correlation. And correlation basically means the relationship between two variables. Ron's going to kick me if I explain statistics wrong. So it's not causation, it's just a relationship, okay? And this chart is in your packet as well. A perfect relationship is the correlation of 1. And correlation goes from a high of 1 to a low of -1. In 2011-12, the correlation between the demographics of the school in terms of how concentrated the poverty was in that school and how the students performed on the test was -0.759, which is, in the world of statistics, a fairly high correlation. That was in reading. In math, it was 0.721. Then if you look for the next year, the reading correlation was 0.827 in reading and 0.664 in math. Negative, yes, sir. And basically what that means is the more concentrated the poverty, the lower the impoverished students' performance. Not all students' performance. We only looked at the students who are qualifying for free and reduced lunch. And then in, that was 12-13, 13-14 was a -0.829 and in reading and a -0.705 in math. And then we did a correlation for all 3 years combined, and that was a -0.783 in reading and a -0.679 in math. So I hope that that helps to answer some of the data you were asking for. If there's more, we have more days till your next meeting, so we can do more.
You want to, Bob, you want to point out the typical map, please?
Oh, yes.
this map, it has a dot for each of the elementary schools, and it just factually shows the percent free and reduced lunch that was the result of the last scenario. And so, as Scott pointed out, the statistic of free and reduced lunch here doesn't necessarily match that. This is based on residences, on who lives there. It doesn't take into consideration the fact that a school might have a program, a GT program, that brings other kids in. Similar to the other graphic, the green dots show the schools with the lowest percentage free and reduced lunch. The yellow show the ones in the middle, and the red show the ones with the highest free and reduced lunch. So, graphically it reads just 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 12 of each approximately. And then the exact numbers, which I appreciate you can't see from far away, are the same numbers that are in the table that Scott gave you. Okay? And, an observation, obviously, there's a lot of red toward the middle and a little bit scattered around, and there's a lot of green to the south. And no matter what you do, 12 are going to be green, 12 are going to be yellow, and 12 are going to be red. But they may not have the same numbers. And so to some extent, this does show you, there's a 14 not far from a 74, or a 36 near a 58, not far from a 90. So it kind of gives you an idea of how the distribution is. Here's an example of a 9 and a 75. 9% free and reduced lunch, 75% free and reduced lunch, 38, 29. Question? Is that?
Everybody got it? Committee? You get it? Okay. Thank you, Bob. Okay, folks.
Can we move that? Might be in the way.
Like right behind our one?
Maybe. It's just got a glare over there for this side, for me anyway.
We'll try not to hit any wires and any short.
Thank you.
Are we in danger here?
Recall once before we did
I mean, I'm already getting hazard duty pay. So. Okay, folks. Just leave it alone and move on to middle schools.
No, hey, Alan, I have a question. I know that each school that we move, we try to look at, try to move it to 100% on low 100. So Rosa Park scenario B, the one we're going to stick with,
Right.
is 123. And we are going to go back and break that down.
We can. We certainly can, but that's where we stopped the other night. And it was at least the consensus that night that we could live with that number. But, until we get to a final solution, it's all of it's open for discussion.
Because I remember at the beginning meetings, we were talking about our goal was no portable.
Right.
And I think that may bring up portable, for sure.
I assume that's right. Is that right, Mary?
And I thought we were just pausing there, but we were going to wait till we get those projection numbers next week, which may change all that.
Yeah,
and then we start looking at.
Yeah, because we know to the north and west, Sandersville, for example, we know all those areas are going to change dramatically. But that was our stopping point because it made the most sense at that point. But with the understanding that the projections could significantly change some things. Julie, are you raising your hand?
No.
Okay. Well, you've had the opportunity to do a perusal on all the data that we've been able to disseminate. And landed on Tuesday night. Any conversation?
I think it would be more helpful if we had that map where we could see the school district. Like if I could see that here beside these schools, which ones were 95% versus 15%, I could do something with it. It's just far away. I can't. Like based off this and based off that. Not the only one.
Do that, yeah.
What do you want? You want me to? Sure.
You can take one of your scenario maps and write down your stuff. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll just go from top to bottom. Your list is organized alphabetically. So I'll go from top to bottom. Is that okay? Or do you want me to go alphabetically and show you where the schools are?
Let's take some notes here so that you got this on your.
Okay, but I would ask.
Okay, up in the northwest, Sandersville is 36%. The new north school would be 58%. This is free and reduced lunch for those who live in the attendance area.
How much is it?
58. Meadowthorpe is 52%. And Booker T is 90%. And obviously we were talking about a lot of changes because of opening the North School, and those changes mostly affected Sandersville and Booker T. Okay. Continuing on the west side of town, Cardinal Valley is 94. Harrison is 89%. James Lane Allen is 75%. Picadome is 64%. Garden Springs is 38%. And Rosa Parks is 9%. Clays Mill is 29%. Stonewall is 20%. And Wellington is 31%. As I was saying about the green, 5 of those schools are in the lowest 12, among the lowest 12 in terms of percent free and reduced lunch, and then there's one in the middle and one that's very high. Going from north to south, on the east side of town, off the edge of the map, Russell Cave is 82%, Mary Todd is 91%, Northern is 70, Deep Springs is 71, and Dixie is 67. Yates is 77. Arlington is 93. Notice in this example that 70, 71, 67, and 77, they're all very close in number. It just so happens that 77 puts Yates at about the 10th or 12th highest free and reduced lunch. But it's not that much different from those that are nearby that are right in the middle at 70, 71, 67. Continuing southward, William Wells Brown is 94%. Ashland is 52%. Cassidy is 30%. Breckenridge is 84%. Liberty is 41%. The new proposed East School would be 36%. Athens Charlesburg is now 15%. Continuing southward from Glendover, 51%. 62% at Julius Marks. Lansdowne is 74%, and Tates Creek is 73%. In terms of free and reduced rank, Tates Creek is 12. It's right at that edge of being in the top third versus the middle third. Southern is 46%, which is right at the edge of being in the middle third versus the lowest free and reduced lunch third. Mill Creek is 70%, Squires is 58%, and Veterans Park is 14%. So in this part of town, it ranges from 14% to 74%. Anything need to be repeated, or any question or
Can you tell me what Harrison was again?
Harrison is 89%. And once again, these figures in terms of...
They're all on your
Yes.
scenario C that you have in your pack.
Scenario C.
Scenario C.
Yes. They're all, and alphabetically, they're all there. This just helps you see that, you know, the 84 at Breckenridge versus the 15 at Aiken Stroudsburg, things like that. And you can get the perspective of the distance between the two.
Now can Scott put back the map that we finished with last time with the study areas on it?
Scott?
What area do you want to look at?
Perhaps for the moment, just show the, turn off all the study areas and let them get an overall perspective of the boundaries. Maybe with the overlay of the existing boundary as well.
I think this is the best map for that.
Right.
Can he overlay it with the current boundaries?
That is. The blue has the current boundaries.
Okay.
The color is the scenario we're looking at.
Right.
And recall that this map that I put these dots on, anything that is kind of the pinkish rose color is a neighborhood which is above 50% free and reduced lunch. Anything which is green, lime-colored green, is below 50% free and reduced lunch. Or, excuse me, above 50%. I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused. The lime green is below 50% free and reduced lunch. The rose color is above 50% free and reduced lunch. The gray is less than 5 students, actually even 0, and then crosshatched is less than 5. So, for example, you can see there's so much pink and red up here that it makes sense that all of these schools would be above 50% free and reduced lunch. And there's so much green over here, it makes sense that all of those schools would be below 50%. And over here, it's more mixed.
Now, can't we just get those folks to move where we want?
I think that's great. Scott,
Scott, can you do that?
Yeah, I wish I...
Welcome, Bill.
I can produce, from here forward, I can produce maps similar to what Bob was talking about, where I can color code the attendance areas by that third, one third, or I could do the red, green, the above or below. So just let me know what we need to do, and I can send that along with what I'm sending anyway.
Now, what about establishing thresholds for schools and kind of throw it back at Scott to try to work it out? Like if we think maybe 20% free and reduced lunch, or vice versa, is an acceptable threshold for a school without driving kids all the way across town, so we can put that as a
The district average is 54%, though, so you couldn't get it down.
Well, I'm just talking about the extremes. The extremes.
Well, I did a quick analysis on the extremes. using 85% on the high end and 20% on the low end, and there are 9 schools that fall within that. So 25% of our schools are in those extremes if that becomes a benchmark. 6 of them are in the high range, and 3 schools are in the very low range. And you have the numbers in front of you. See which ones they are.
Yeah, well, I guess it gets kind of testy when you start deciding what schools to send where. So, I don't know, it looks like on the west side, it's 3 schools that are green and 2 schools that are red. If we set some parameters for Scott to use, it seems like that would help, us in making decisions on maybe possibly what areas to move into what schools to help try to make it more balanced or make it acceptable in the threshold.
Go ahead. Who would, Sandra, you next? Okay.
Well, what I was looking at is, like, if you look at the map, there's this area that is in Rosa Park that kind of goes all the way inside Rosa Park that is green, or whatever color that is. It goes to James Lane Allen. And I was thinking, why do they cross that street to go to James Lane Allen and not go to Rosa Park? Is that helping the socioeconomic diversity or hurting it? Can we look at that? And I don't have the numbers.
No one lives there.
No one lives
No one lives there?
Historically, it was placed there that if that area were to grow, they would go to James Lane Allen. But
Okay.
no one lives there.
Okay.
It's less than 5.
Well, let me ask the question of the committee. Is it a worthwhile discussion, should we have, that there ought to be some threshold or benchmark positions?
I don't know if that's going to be possible in certain areas of town. It's going to be an issue I think we're going to run into repeatedly.
There are remediations for some of these things. Lisa gave me some information today that listed a number of alternative opportunities to change these numbers. Do you have that list?
It was in that article that someone attached to Let's Talk.
I don't think that we can do it all over town, but I do believe we should try to get it done as much as possible in the areas where it can be done.
Right.
It has been done because it was done in certain areas that we undone. And that is what I was trying to get at maybe 2 meetings ago when we were undoing, those, when I was asking Bob, was this done for socioeconomic reasons? Was this not done for socioeconomic reasons? Because, 10 years ago, I'm sure whoever was on this board had this same conversation. So there was a lot of work that we have undone that I feel like we might need to relook at in certain areas of town, because there was a reason for that, and that was.
Which schools in particular? I mean, just point a school out you're saying.
I would like to see.
I would have to go back. I would have to go back and look at those maps.
Ron?
However we land on this tonight, I mean, we've talked about how difficult it is to achieve more diversity given where schools are and where neighborhoods are. I would still like to see, in keeping with the comment here, is I'd like to see Scott provide us at our next meeting with a revised map that just shows us what's, say, an 80% maximum free and reduced lunch versus 20% minimum free and reduced lunch, what that would look like, so we know what we're talking about here. I had mentioned earlier in our pre-meeting, and I'll just throw it out there, and I know we're not agreed on this at all, but to give the board our best case recommendations, but a backup recommendation as well for them to consider if this is not something we can really addressed because some of these principles conflict with each other. So I would like to see that data. I'm not set on the 80-20, but I would like to see Scott produce some scenarios based on the work we've done so far and knowing how we're landing on these numbers. And of course, the projected, we're going to have the projected numbers next week. These are just people that live in the area. So that's going to change some things as well. So I would like to see that, just to follow up on the question here. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a response to that. I think sometimes when we get several scenarios, it gets more complicated. I think we need to figure out maybe what threshold we want it to be, and then try to move a section at a time if that's what we want to do, just because otherwise it's like starting over again. We put all this work into it, and we said that some areas we can do this to and some we can't. Why should we not take what we have now and just look at certain areas of schools that need to be fixed and just work in those areas to see what we could do? And that way it is the closest school, because I look at it as two working parents trying to get their kids there. So how about if one of you guys come up with whatever the threshold is, and then us take an area at a time and address just those issues instead of redoing the whole map? Because sometimes I think we get all these scenarios and then we don't use half of them, and it just gets more confusing, in my opinion.
And again, I'm not suggesting redoing the whole map, but just whatever we land on after we have our discussion tonight, that would be an additional exercise for Scott to look at to see what it looks like. And, you know, we can sit here and talk about moving study area versus study area, and it's going to take us another 3 weeks to do that.
Let me ask a larger question here, and that is the committee's appetite for establishing thresholds. Is there a number that is unacceptable, whether it be too low or too high? I don't know where we land on that as a group, as a committee, because the answer to that question may expedite this whole conversation.
I think, too, Alan, feedback off that, I think if we are trying to, address as many of the principles as possible, even though some of them conflict, you could set the thresholds. We do know that if you set thresholds, that means there's going to be other additional factors, busing, that we just have to understand have to happen. And that means we would say that's okay, regardless of the cost, which is not a bad thing. If it meets part of the being able to establish some thresholds that are just too low and not acceptable. So I don't think that's a bad idea to set a threshold. And it could be that you won't have anything under 20%, anything over 80%. You could do that. It just will bring in additional decisions that we need to make and then in the beginning actually accept prior to even going into that. Because there's no need to say we're going to do that and then say, well, we don't want the transportation cost. Or, you just have to accept some things as part of that, but I think that will help address as many of the principles as possible, even though they do conflict in nature.
I think we need to be careful not to be too quick to discount the work we had done the last couple of weeks. I just kind of went through it real quickly, just looked from where we started, the current boundaries, to what we changed to scenario C. And the change that she spoke to, what I counted was 6 schools that changed more than 10%, good or bad, either way. So if that's a consideration, maybe that's the 6 we should look at, see if there's anything that can be done with those rather than throwing everything we've done out the window and starting over. And the threshold may or may not be the way to go. I'm not speaking to that. I'm just thinking we keep it on a piece basis, not a grand macro scale.
No one has suggested throwing out
Right.
anything we've done.
Right. There might be other ways to tackle it too, besides just the math, like we discussed before. Maybe some of these other schools that do have these higher numbers, maybe they receive some preference for certain magnets programs or other opportunities in the district that might be better suited to alleviating.
Well, that's what I was alluding to earlier, some alternative ways to deal with some of these, the concerns that we may have about concentrations.
I agree that anything we do, we should probably start with where we're at, and then maybe identify those areas that we want to look at.
Lisa, with the data that you shared today, I guess what I took from it, it looked like there's a high concentration of free and reduced lunch students that, I want to be careful how I say it. I don't know, it looked like the academic performance as far as math and reading was below proficiency in those areas. Now, if we did develop thresholds as a committee, I mean, is 20% too low to affect the outcomes of those students if we make that the threshold, the 80-20? I mean, is that just moving a few kids that won't affect the outcome of diversifying the school, or?
Well, changing it from 18 to 22 doesn't make a bit of difference. Is your flipping, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but taking it from 97 to 80, 97% to 80 is a big difference. I mean, but is that enough to affect the?
Well, that doesn't preclude doing these other types of things in terms of programs and such as well. I just wanted to see what it looks like. That's all I'm suggesting.
We're not suggesting that we're going to fix every single problem by doing that tonight or by redistricting. But if we can help 12 kids in 40 schools, then I think that we've done something great. So I think we help many of them as we can through the redistricting. And then as Malcolm stated at the last meeting, we do something else after we finish here. We don't end this year. We don't stop fighting to make these schools better after we finish redistricting. But we need to help as many of the students that we can help through the redistricting as we can, which is what the data shows that I sent out earlier. Can we help them all? No. But should we help as many as possible? I think we should.
To your question, James, there is a more nuanced analysis that we might be able to do with more time that would look at predictability. But 18 to 22%, to that 4% of students who will have an opportunity to perform better in that school than in an island of poverty, it will make a difference to those children who are moved. The analysis that we did is not going to give you that threshold or that tipping point per se, but you can see that having 50% or fewer is a statistically significant correlation for the children who are in those schools.
And you're looking at that change.
Lisa, I agree with you, and I didn't, I know you're responding to what I said. My point, though, was relative to the entire community, all the schools, all the work that we've done. While it is everything we do is going to be significant to some kids one way or the other, is an 18 to 22% change in free and reduced lunch in one school, while it does impact those 4% perhaps, is that enough for us to, receive from some of the work that we've already done? That's the only caution now.
And I think that's something only the committee can decide how much.
That's a priority judgment.
Right. How much change? How much change do you want to make? And we were just trying to provide the information that was requested so that you could look at where you were against that guiding principle. And I don't know. Student socioeconomic status will be a primary consideration in the assignment of neighborhoods to schools so as to balance the economic diversity of students in every school. And that's your judgment.
Right.
I think we can satisfy part of it, but I don't think we'll be able to balance it. I mean, the word balance doesn't mean that we're going to try to make it as even as possible. That doesn't seem like that's possible.
Well, balancing it would put every school at 54%.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be able to
And
balance
we can't do that. You can't even remotely get close to
But our intent as a committee can mean that we can work towards. That's why I keep saying sometimes it has to be some type of threshold. You can work towards it, but you won't be able to balance it completely without having people all over the place. And I guess the larger question, which is not a part of this committee, is what's going on at the schools that have lower, lower poverty levels between those that are higher poverty. Are the students smarter that move to the lower poverty schools? No, they're not. something that's going on which is not a part of this community. We definitely have to address what's the difference.
The other thing too is this data gives us the percentage pre-introduced lunch. It doesn't tell us what percentage of those pre-introduced lunch kids are English language learners in special education and how that relates in too. There's a whole lot that goes into it. It's not just the pre-introduced lunch. It's what goes on to those kids, because I know there are times when you get double hit with the data because your pre-introduced lunch kids fall into all sorts of different subgroups. You know, and so that's something to keep in mind as well.
And I would argue that means that making that 4% difference could affect a lot more kids in achievement gaps, because it's going to affect other gaps as well, not just the free and reduced lunch versus paid lunch gap.
And one thing I want to keep in mind is I want to also help as many kids as possible, but having been in, I know that ACE has a low number now that we've changed it, and I was on SBDM with ACE, and it is hard to increase those grade rankings no matter what school you're in. And one of the issues that we had is that we didn't necessarily get the resources. We might have had as many kids, but with the population being larger, you don't always get the resources you might get in other schools too. So we'd have to come up with a way to spread those resources more if we do. I wouldn't want to take resources away from someone.
Resources meaning like Title I?
Right, exactly.
Well, I've done an informal, it's very informal, survey of a number of principals who aren't as worried about that as we are. That in many cases, they just soon not have Title I resources because their achievement does go up to the lesser free and reduced lunch. So I think that's still a mixed bag. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I don't think that should be a major consideration for us as we try to make this thing work. Other thoughts? A couple of you been quiet. There you go.
If we're drawing these attendance lines, once we get the lines drawn and they know where they're going to be going, that should be left up to the districts. People smarter than us to know what resources need to go to what school. All we're trying to do here is draw as fair as we can be boundary lines. We can't fix every problem moving these lines all over hell saying, hey, we need to draw the line and then leave it to the folks that are smarter than us to see, to put the resources where they need to be.
Smarter than us?
Well,
what the hell are you talking about?
you know what I mean. We need to leave it to them to figure out what resources need to go to Arlington versus Cardinal Valley versus yada, 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 down the line.
Well, I am hopeful.
We're never going to get this done if we don't do something.
Well, when we begin to write our recommendations, those of you who are going to be engaged in that, that those are the sorts of recommendations beyond our scope that we're going to be making about where we think some resources could make a difference to literally deal with what might on paper appear to be an inequitable situation. And we do have the ability to do that, or recommend.
I would just, the original question was thrown out there is, do we want to talk about some thresholds just to look at it? And I would still like to hear us, come to a consensus on that. There are 6 schools that are currently with this map we're working with now, 6 schools that are over 85% free and reduced lunch. So whether it's 80, which would bring in 2 more schools, or 85, I would like to see us take a look at what Scott can do with, keeping in mind they're as close as they can be to the schools, as close as they can be to this current map or wherever we end up with at the end of the night tonight. I would like to see where we land on that. It's not suggesting that we redraw the lines or redo the work. I just want to see what it looks like.
Scott?
Alan, before we get to the map, I have just one more theoretical question about the outcome of socioeconomic diversity. And I think Malcolm, and both of you and Malcolm mentioned how impracticable it would be to balance this across the district. And Lisa may have said this when she was giving this data just a moment ago, and I missed it, so if she did, I apologize. But it sounded like that moving some of the students from the free and reduced programs would have the positive impact on those students who were moved into a school that had fewer and reduced students. So then what do you do to affect the ones that are left behind? And sorry, this is the data that you send and anybody else, does anything speak to moving non-free and reduced students into poor schools and poor performing schools, and what sort of impact that has on the larger school, so that you're not just affecting the 4% that you're moving out of the school, but then you're having a larger effect on the school because you're bringing in students who are not from that demographic. And I'm just curious if the research says anything to that.
The diversity piece was shared with us. It does.
Yes.
It works both ways, and you're going to have parents that are, in general, the parents of kids that are not free and reduced lunch are more active in the schools, have the ability to work in schools because of other considerations going on in the home. And you could, there's no way to say for sure, but in theory, that's going to help both sets of schools, the ones where the kids are coming out and the ones where the kids are going.
I would think there would be more than just theory to that, though. I would imagine that would have been studied over the years.
The information that I sent out today shows the statistics on the impact for minority students, Caucasian students. It talks about the global impact of living in a global society, you know, all of the races coming together. I mean, it talks about all of that. So if you have a chance to go back and kind of look at that, you know, it speaks to the benefits of everybody, to everybody, and how it impacts on all sides, education-wise and just basic being in the world with people who are different than yourself.
I want to mention as well, though, that not all free and reduced lunch kids are minority kids.
Yeah,
that's an important point to keep in mind. I mean, it goes across demographics.
I think one thing.
But all the research that we're talking about, the majority of it, doesn't speak specifically to race, but rather to poverty. Right. And the concentration, all of the stuff that we read today, everything that I read today, talked about concentration of poverty being the main factor in achievement, not race or anything else. And I think that's an important distinction.
I think one way to answer your question, though, is, you know, one of the first data points we got, like back in April, was we got the spreadsheet of study districts, who lived there, and what percentage of students actually went to their assigned school. Right. And when you look at that data, the people in Fayette County, so I don't know about the United States, but in Fayette County, if you were one of those people who was moved into a school from, you know, a upper income or middle income area to a poor school, those study districts tended not to go to that school at a very high rate. So I don't know that just moving them simply solves your problem if they're not actually going to attend that school.
That's a great question.
If we could ask the audience to kind of withhold from any displays, please.
I mean, in our early public forums, first couple we had folks basically, in my mind, threatening, well, we'll take our kids out of school, and my thought was, well, don't let it hit you in the butt on the way out. We don't want to, I'm sorry to be blunt about this, but if it's a parental choice issue, so if people get redistricted and they don't think they like the school, they have options. They can put their kids in other programs. If they want to go to private school, that's fine. I'm sorry, I just don't.
And I also feel like, those state parents should also.
Whether that's right or wrong,
correct.
It's the reality of whether it happens or not.
Yeah.
However, those parents also have the option to show the same passion that they have showed here by going down to the school board and going to the equity council and showing that same passion of saying, hey, guess what, my child has been redistricted to this school, and I feel like there needs to be some additional resources sent to this school. Why is this school underperforming? They have that same parental passion to go into that school district and go down to the school board and say, hey, you know, we were at this school and it was performing at this level and we had these things offered to us. Why does this school not? They have a distinct opportunity in that moment also as an entire neighborhood to be heard in a very different way. So they can choose to take their kids out of that school, or they can choose to go fight for the new school and make it right.
So, with what you're saying is, let's fix it so that it looks good on paper. It doesn't matter if the parents send their kids to school there or not. Because then, your numbers are still going to be the same if parents aren't sending their kids to school there. You're going to be right where we are right now.
We're drawing the maps for the future. And so in terms of people, if it's to believe that people move into an area and buy a house in a neighborhood solely because of what their impression of the school is, that's going to filter out over time. If people take their kids out and don't put them in that school, well, people that are going to be buying homes in the area in the future are going to be going there because they want their kids to be in that school. So,
I disagree.
You know, Ellen, just to come over here, Bill. Oh, we're in the corner. I think one of the reasons why we have this issue, and it was in one of the original meetings we had a conversation, is that 13 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, when we worked on redistricting, this larger redistricting, the percentage of kids who were receiving free or reduced lunch was 27%. And 12 years later, it's 54%. So we're trying to determine how, based on the changing demographics of Fayette County and Lexington, how to address this issue. And the information that we received today regarding schools and segregation or integration, there was one in particular that was discussed, and that was Raleigh-Wade County. And I'm from that area, so let me just give you what happened. We're talking about the percentages. In Raleigh-Wade County, 40%, it was decided by the school board that no school would have more than 40% of the students on free or reduced lunch. So looking at the social economic status of students and whether or not moving a percentage, I don't know, and perhaps the academicians from Fayette County Public Schools can provide us. So what's the percentage of students should attend the school or not attend the school? That would not make it a high poverty school because we're kind of randomly choosing a metric, 18%, 22%. But if the percent of students attending the school was less than X, that would not make it a high poverty school. I think the other part that we've had in these conversations, when people said in the public meetings, we want neighborhood schools. We don't want to bus the kids. What we would prefer doing is taking the additional cost that would have been incurred in busing and invest that money into the schools that would be effective. That was one of the conversations that people had. So the question is, how much money are we talking about? Because we're discussing the reallocation of resources. And then finally, I think part of the problem is there's a lack of trust. That when we talk about these high poverty schools, that the school district is going to do everything that's necessary to ensure that the appropriate amount of resources are placed in those schools to ensure that those students have an equal opportunity. I think that's the primary reason why there's a lot of conversation about moving kids from one school to the next. And the question ought to be asked, even though we can make recommendations, what in essence we're doing is we are consciously creating high poverty schools based on the way that we're recommending the redistricting. Are there any
and I hate to use this term, legal issues or legal opportunities that we can say to the school board, we made this recommendation because you've agreed that you're going to allocate the appropriate resources. Should you not appropriate the correct resources, then there's some other repercussions that can be implemented that would allow those students to have the same opportunity. So again, I think the primary reason why we have this problem is the percentage of kids that are receiving pre-reduced lunch has doubled. The question is the school board and the school district prepared to appropriate the correct resources to ensure that every student has an opportunity for a quality public education?
Thanks, Bill. I would simply interject as the traffic cop here that the school board, in their wisdom, did not put thresholds as they did in Wake County. They didn't mandate a particular number in any category, by the way. So while that's important and works in a different jurisdiction, we have the ability to address it ourselves.
The reason why I brought it up was to give a suggestion as to what some other school district has used as a threshold, not to suggest that we should do that. We could even be higher or lower than that.
Right. Well, if we have 54% already, we could make it 40% and we wouldn't hit the number. Well, I mean, given that a bunch of kids, it wouldn't be in a school.
Well, because the fact of the matter is, given the current trajectory, in the next 5 years, we're looking at approximately 65% of the kids on free or reduced lunch. Because it's going up 2 basis points each year.
I get that, but there's nothing we can do
about that right now.
I mean, that trajectory is what it is, and it's independent from the process that we're in right now.
It's independent, but this committee could make recommendations.
And indeed, I'm hopeful that we will be doing that. You can participate.
I don't.
Okay.
Anyway, what was, I'd like to know what Lisa was trying to say a few minutes ago. Were you trying to make a point or?
No, I just want, someone had asked a question, and I don't know who gave us this article. It was submitted through Let's Talk. But it's interesting because this article speaks to a book that the Strategic Data Project has the fellows reading, which looks at what happened in Montgomery County schools. And Montgomery County out in Maryland is known for its tremendous efforts in closing achievement gaps and its success in doing that. And what this, if you look on this article that they gave us on page 4, over here on the right-hand side, basically because Montgomery County has 2 things that work. One of them is they have a housing policy in their community that provides better socioeconomic diversity. And they also then made this major investment into what they called red zone schools and green zone schools to provide additional resources where there was a high concentration of impoverished students. And it says right here, this research took advantage of a rare opportunity to compare 2 education approaches. On the one hand, the Montgomery County School District had invested substantial extra resources, about $2,000 per pupil, in its lowest income schools, dubbed the red zone, to employ a number of innovative educational approaches. On the other hand, the county also has a long-standing inclusionary housing policy that allows low-income students to live in middle and upper middle-class communities and attend fairly affluent schools. Thus, Montgomery County offers an interesting experiment. Do low-income students perform better in high-poverty schools that receive greater resources or in more affluent schools with fewer resources? Which matters more for low-income students? Extended learning time, smaller class size, and intensive teacher development programs, all made available in Montgomery County's higher poverty schools, or the types of advantages usually associated with schools in which the majority of students come from affluent families, such as positive peer role models, as active parental communities and strong teachers. The results were unmistakable. Low-income students attending more affluent elementary schools significantly outperformed low-income students who attended higher poverty schools with state-of-the-art educational intervention. We're going to have to look at Let's Talk.
Is there any other data that contradicts that? Are there studies?
Yeah, there's always no. Right.
Well, yeah, all right, but I haven't seen very much of it, and I've been looking.
None that I can find that are peer-reviewed, like at Harvard, and, you know, some of these more, you know, Fisk University, you know, some of these more reputable. I've been looking too, because I'm trying to find a balance.
It's all over the place, but if you look at who funds it, you're right. There's not a lot of.
There's no peer-reviewed studies that contradict what you found.
I can hear you, sir.
I said there's no peer-reviewed studies that contradict what we've all found.
There's none.
I mean, not that we found. I mean, the last 2 days. The last 2 days, I think I've called everybody I know, even from here to UK. I've called all of the researchers I know to find information because I figured I would be called out on what I found. So I called and tried to contradict myself on purpose and could not do it.
Well, irrespective to what the research says, what do we do? We're talking about Fayette County. Again, if you look at the numbers here, we have 9 schools who are in these extreme ranges. 3 that are significantly low in their percentage of free and reduced meals, and 6 that are high. And if you even extend that threshold from 85% down to 80%, it only adds 2 more schools. So that makes it 8 and 3.
And again, all I'm asking is that we have Scott take a look at it. I agree with Mr. Farmer that we need to look at where resources are being spent. And I don't know how those numbers, when Scott, if he would come up with these things, how drastically that would shift what we've already looked at here. And again, we still don't have the projected numbers. We're looking just at current residents at the moment. So I expect many things, parts of the city are going to shift significantly when we look at people that are going out of school to other programs. I would just like to see the numbers. I don't know that we can make any decision about what to do about that at this point.
Well, I was going to ask Scott if that is something that's doable at the moment. Can we do that on the screen now?
Yes, we can. That's what I was going to suggest. We can identify what you said.
Jump in anytime, Scott. Ellie might save us 10 minutes of conversation.
Me from digging myself a bigger hole.
Well, I have no objection to saying that right now.
Okay.
We can do it. And if those numbers could be 85 and 15, or just identify those schools that fall in that range.
Yeah, we could do that. We just have to have the committee, I think, agree on what the range is.
I'm saying 85-15.
All right. Well, we could start with Arlington, which is at 90.
Everybody, okay, we're good with that? It's good to be the king. Or not.
So where do you want to start? You want to start at the worst or the least equitable?
Now, let's start with the real. From what we're hearing from this data and research, while peer performance is important in the schools where it's very low, the number of free and reduced lunch, the bigger problem that impacts more achievement or less is in the high concentrations of these areas. So I'd start there.
Okay. Well, we've got Arlington that's on 93% free and reduced. Cardinal Valley was 94%. 90%. You can pick any one of these above our threshold.
Just a tip from experience, the further north it is, the harder it'll be. Russell Cave would be hardest, and Harrison, or if Breckenridge is right at that edge. Breckenridge is at 84%.
Right.
Theoretically, that would be the
Russell Cave's at 82. So those are two that don't meet that 85 threshold, but are right there. So we can include those. There is no impact on the low end there based on these numbers. There isn't anybody from 15 to 20. So we could make that 80-20. Does that make our task more or less difficult?
Or in terms of result, yeah. To bring a school that's 95 down to 80 would be harder than just bringing it down to 88.
If you're looking at not busing people very far, it seems like, in the downtown area, you're going to be looking at just changing percentages from, upping Northerns to lower Arlingtons. Is that going to make a significant difference? Like when you're looking at things that are nearby, unless you're looking at really busing out, to predominantly the south side of town. Is that what we're kind of looking at doing? Just swapping out? Yes? But have to what, bus to?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you got the concentration of all of them high poverty, yeah. I mean, have a choice.
So is Scott waiting on us, or is he working?
I'm waiting on you. Tell me where to start. I'm waiting on you.
Let me ask you a question.
Austin.
Oh, sorry. I don't know how feasible this is.
My concern is that we talk about the research. Fayette County has lived with this issue many years ago, more years than I want to admit. We, the court order, integrated these schools by taking the inner city kids, Bluegrass Espadale, which was the largest public housing complex, and we integrated all the schools by sending the white kids who lived in those complexes. They walked to Johnson, and the African American kids were all bused to, I think it was 11 different elementary schools. They integrated Claysville, Lansdowne, and all. It didn't work because we changed it. We changed it in the late 80s. In 2000 plus, we built in the inner city the first new school, William Wells Brown, which has a concentration of poverty, and it's not working. We certainly don't want to bust them out, or are we going to be able to bust someone in? But if you take a William Wells Brown, you take a Rosa Parks, clearly there is a different level of poverty. And you've got 24 kids per classroom at Rosa Parks, and you've got 24 kids at William Wells Brown. There's a problem. That's not a problem for the redistricting committee, but I think it's a problem for Fayette County. And in our recommendation, I think we need to say to the school system that they need to become creative in how we deal with poverty, because neighborhood and housing patterns are going to dictate that we're going to always, if in fact we want neighborhood schools, we're going to have schools of concentrated with poverty. And I think that unless we go back to that busing, which I strongly would be opposed to bus kids for the purpose of integration.
It doesn't work. What I found most compelling of all the things that we've read in the last 2 days was the article on the impact of housing, transient versus ownership, and people who lived in their areas dealt with poverty and had higher achievement than those who were more transient. even within the context of, let's say, William Wells Grant. And I, you know, I don't know what we do about that necessarily. That's a conversation for other folks. But that's an important factor as much as anything from what we read today. Home ownership, that matters, and it matters in achievement.
Austin, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I didn't understand what you were saying earlier. And this may be opening up a whole new can of worms. When I taught in Boston...
Somebody cut off her microphone, please.
When I taught in Boston, well, the suburbs of Boston, they had the Metro program, which was voluntary busing into the suburbs. Would it be possible for the school board to approve something along those lines, where there are maybe parents who want their kids to be bused out, giving them that option to apply for that instead of forcing them to be districted someplace all the way across town, letting the families make those decisions for their kids instead of us make those decisions for the kids?
I'll just step in here real quickly, and I don't know all the major details, but we did that, and this was before my time, but when we created our magnet program, and we had veterans with a magnet, Rosa Parks with a magnet, and we did give everyone who wanted to apply to be at that magnet school an opportunity. And what we found, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we found was that the lower socioeconomic groups still wanted to stay within their area. And
I don't know the answer to that.
As neighborhoods.
As neighborhoods. So we did try that. I don't know major details. That was, like I said,
Isn't that essentially what Malcolm was saying the other day?
And it's for other reasons, you know.
Yeah.
But they still want a high-quality education. I don't want to dismiss that in what I'm saying and saying that people just choose to. They want a high-quality school. However, there are other barriers that impact, you know, in terms of when you do bus across town, workplaces, transportation issues. You know, it's a lot of things that, you know, revolve around that.
I don't think there are very many people in this room tonight who think that more busing is an answer to anything.
Melissa, did that experiment include transportation so that
Yes.
the children who wanted to go from Harrison to Rosa Parks were bused
Yes.
there?
Yeah, if a parent chose that and to be part of that magnet program, there would be transportation provided.
And wasn't that a feature from No Child Left Behind that kids in failing schools could move to the higher performing schools?
That's a different, actually, that's a different issue.
Yeah, it was different.
This was just something Fayette County did, and there was a lottery at these schools where siblings in the school counted extra, and actually being minority counted extra. I'm, you know, where I've been going with this and kind of pushing here is not, I'm not pushing for busing. You know, the neighborhood school is an important thing to all neighborhoods. I'm just thinking, you know, with what we have here, I'd like to see if Scott can do anything tinkering around the edges without moving kids great distances to see if we can do a bit to provide more balance in these schools. And I wasn't thinking of, and I'm sorry, Alan, I wasn't talking about, you know, I think Scott's waiting for us to tell him this study area to here. I was just thinking, I thought his computer models could set a threshold and generate some stuff based on where we are without us telling him to move this neighborhood here, this study area here.
Go through that. That's,
No,
I don't.
our
That's very bad.
Do that. Our models could not do that. It would have to be us manually, just like we've been doing before, looking at those areas we want to change, and then go from there.
And I think what I'm...
And, you know, just before we get too far in this, we're not going to be able to solve a good portion of this just by redistricting. What I've got up here, if you can look at our screen, the dark black lines are Scenario C attendance areas. The red study areas are study areas that have 50% or more free and reduced. The hashtags are study areas that have less than 5 students. So if you look at Booker T. Washington, which is at 90% free and reduced, it's all of them are over 50% in the attendance area, and they're surrounded by either the same or ones that have very small students. I'm not saying that we can't do a little redistricting to help. I'm just saying we're not going to be able to solve all of these and get it under that threshold. It's just going to be without doing some very drastic moves.
I agree with Ron. I wasn't talking about busing across town either, if at all possible, but I would just like to see what he can do. But I think we can probably help Scott out a little bit with trying to still come down on the capacity of some of these schools, because I just, like when we left Rosa Parks at 123%, I think that's just going to set us up for being in the same bucket when we get to the middle schools if we leave the school capacity that high. And I don't think the committee wants to sit here and try to pick the neighborhood, to try to balance the schools. I think that would be something for Scott to do. And then maybe we can put another parameter as far as the 80-20 is maybe, I don't know, maybe a mileage. A certain, if a child has to travel this far, then maybe that's too far to move that neighborhood or that group. And then, he can just see what he can do with some of the areas, because some of the schools are in close proximity to a green school close to a red school.
Okay, I'm looking at the map. I'm looking at the green area by Mill Creek. And then Veterans Park is at 14 and Mill Creek is at 70. There's a large area of Mill Creek that looks like they could go into Veterans Park. That would probably help those numbers with very little busing. Then I'm looking at Rosa Parks, they're at 9%. Garden Springs is at 38, and James Allen is at 75. There could be some movement there. Picadone is at 64. There could be movement in that area to help those numbers. I'm not talking about major changes. I'm just talking about changes. Breckenridge is at 84. Cassidy is at 30. There could be changes there. I understand that you might have to bus a kid across the street. I think that's okay. Our kids cross the street. They do. We drive them across the street in our cars every day. It would be fine. The buses are going to cross the street at some point. That's not a problem. I think some of these excuses that we make for where we make the boundaries are just that. I'm looking at 58% at Squires, and then you have 73 at Pace Creek. I mean, there are some changes that can be made on the map that we have come up with that would be small changes. I'm not talking about busing kids 30 minutes away from their homes. I'm not talking about busing kids 25 minutes away, an hour away. I'm not talking about taking 82 from Russell Cave and moving them to Rosa Parks. That would be extreme. That is a different conversation to have with the school board after the fact. But 75 from James Allen into Rosa Parks, I think that's doable. I think that's something that can be done. 84 out of Breckenridge into Cassidy. I'm not exactly sure where that is in Lexington, Mount Vernon and Idle Hour Country Club. What I'm looking at where I'm looking at this map, I can't tell you exactly mileage or whatever, but I still feel like that's doable. What I've learned from being on this committee is that we say neighborhood schools, but then we say we'll put our kid in private school. Well, you're probably driving your kid further away. So the truth is we'll drive those miles to put our kids where we want them to go. So I think some people will just leave their kid on the bus even if they have to drive 3 miles versus 1. When my child was going to Julius Marks versus Squires, he stayed on that bus. I wasn't going to take off work to take him to a different school because I didn't want him to go to Julius Marks and there was a closer elementary school. He just went to the school he's districted to. And I think for the majority of the parents in Lexington, wherever the bus goes is where their child will go. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying take somebody's child and put them on the bus for half an hour. I know in Louisville they did that where they had the kids that were bused and, it caused a huge mess. I would never, want that for anybody's child, including my own. I have 2 that are Fayette County students. But there are some small changes to the map that we have all kind of agreed upon that I believe that could be made here tonight.
Anybody else?
Well, then where do we start? We're spinning our wheels. Let's go.
Can you put the green and the red like we had at one of our first meetings up on this draft that we've got so we can see areas that may touch?
I'm with you. Let's go.
White would be green, basically.
Yeah, because I don't have that same map that, or is that a map I...
Go.
Is there any way to see streets so we can kind of figure out where we are, just our bearings, so we know what neighborhoods?
We could even start by putting Rabbit Run back together.
Well, I'm not so sure we shouldn't do that anyway.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's proximity.
He said, where did we start? I said, maybe we should start by putting Rabbit Run back
Correct,
together.
but I thought were pretty decent recommendations. We all got the same emails probably.
Right. Yeah, and again, we're trying to pay attention.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, so what area do we want to go to?
Where's Rabbit Run?
Near Stonewall.
Right.
Can we bring that up so we can do that first?
Sure. Let's try to fix that Rabbit Run Stonewall deal.
Study areas 417 and 471.
Okay, so we're at Stonewall. What is it that we want to accomplish here?
From those, just a comment and clarification from the emails and the neighborhoods, 417 is kind of split. 417 is a large study area right at the edge of the map right now. Scott, if you move the map a little bit, you can see 417 as well.
Okay.
A portion, half of 417 can walk to Stonewall and is considered part of the Stonewall neighborhood. Now, given the way the district, the study area is, it's hard to change that. That was one of the comments that was made. And yeah, there's this, that shows the neighborhood boundary, how it splits 417. And the other comment is that 471 and most of 470 are in Rabbit Run, so that either, 468, 69, 70, and 71 is basically the Rabbit Run neighborhood. Right. So ideally, they should all go to the same school, whether it's Stonewall or Clays Mill.
So where are we at on this?
Well, they're in Stonewall backyard.
Okay. Basically, there's kind of a creek there that separates 471 from 472 and 473. So you could use that boundary if you want. Clays Mill could take in 471. I don't know if there's enough space for 470 and 471, but that's the idea there.
I think that was part of the issue. 471 and 472 are right in Stonewall's backyard. Even though there's that creek does not make that big of a difference.
They can't walk.
They can't walk.
Yeah, they laid it out that they can walk, and in reality you can't.
You can't walk.
Is that the one that they sent in with all the pictures?
The bridge? You can walk from Wellington Way to...
Basically down Wellington Way on the other side in Rabbit Run.
Yeah, just go around the corner.
So yeah, that's what I was saying. We had that talk the other day. If you're driving down the road, the odd number speed going to one school, the even number speed going to another school.
They do that on the
Same
alumni.
neighborhood, but it's a neighborhood street, not a main thoroughfare. Right.
That's a three-way stop at Cornwall and Wellington. Those kids probably do their sidewalks. Now bike lanes on the sidewalk, I'm sure that there are kids who walk. And that creek actually runs parallel to Wellington right there. So it's not, it's not that much of a barrier. It runs along Wellington and splits off past.
I think the bigger issue is splitting the neighborhood as opposed to wading through a creek. In reality, I mean,
Because I'm not going to wait. Walk around.
Most of the kids have split that many times.
it might go through good.
Get the Rabbit Run Neighborhood Association built a bridge.
As I recall, we ended up there because we had spent almost all of the meeting trying to figure out who in the world's going to go to Pickadum.
Right.
We got Pickadum at 38% capacity. Where are they going to come from?
Well, and you were trying to eliminate the discontiguous area Pickadum and put it in Stone.
Right.
So yeah, if you put that area
Turns
back,
out that wasn't that good an idea.
I mean, this is the disadvantage of that.
Well, but all things being equal, that part of the stone wall.
With this Stonewall neighborhood, I can split the study area at the neighborhood boundaries. We could put 17A. We could do something of that sort.
Would you create another study area?
What I would do is I would create a study area, and this would be 417A, and this would be 417B. And we could put 417B back into Clay Mills, or whatever, back into Stonewall, I'm sorry.
468 and 69 is big too, so how many kids?
It's not a big deal. If we really want to keep a neighborhood together, we can split some study areas. Let's not, can't go crazy with that though, because each time I have to rebuild everything.
But if I'm, so 68 and 69 are part of the same neighborhood? Part of Rabbit Run. So if we move these into here, and move this into Stonewall, because Stonewall right now is at 100%.
But even in study area 417, I know there's a neighborhood dividing line, but that is very dense. They are very, very close. That's all considered that area right down at the bottom of the hill from Jesse Clark. They're all very compact together.
Which ones?
So 417, Scott was talking about 417 and 417A.
Right.
That would still be dividing a neighborhood.
The blue dots are students.
The count is 34 students in 417 elementary.
What happens if you put them in Stonewall? Do we know what that looks like?
Stonewall's at 100% right now.
But if we were to keep the other neighborhood together, move 470 and 471 into Clays Mill, that would balance that out and keep that neighborhood together. I'm understanding this conversation. It's all Rabbit Run.
So doing that would bring to 730, just 95%, 93%. And then we can move this area back.
About the Pickadome area at the bottom.
These guys are really far from their school.
No, that's
There was.
that's
What do you think?
They don't have to drive past.
looks to be acceptable changes. Minor enough, so as not to upset an apple cart and to reunite that neighbor.
Were we putting 417 back?
He'll split that later.
Can
we talk about where the split is and include part of Arrowhead, where that community is part of?
Well,
If you light it back up with those blue dots again.
so now we include part of Arrowhead. Are we going to get 92 more messages about the other part of Arrowhead?
That's an excellent point.
We can't split the neighborhood. So we're trying not to.
This is a small Arrowhead is the road.
Right, yeah.
Right. I'm saying it's just a neighborhood
boundary.
Well, this is, so then they should go to Stonewall. Yes, and we should move them.
We should move 417 to Stonewall. See,
All or
But this is 417.
oh, I see. All right. This would be after you split it on those neighborhood lines. But
Right.
only the 417, not the new 417A or whatever.
I could split it anywhere we want.
Yeah.
All of those kids
All
could
of
walk.
them can all walk. All of Arrowhead can walk. All of Potomac Trail.
Stonewall's at 100%. Stonewall's at 100%.
I think they
We're
were
down to
something
94
else.
now. There's room for 40 students.
Are we still looking at socioeconomic diversity? In these
So there's
moves?
34.
There's 34 students, and if you split it, that you would leave at least, it would appear to be contiguous. If you put all of 417 in Stonewall, then you created a discontiguous area.
And
Well,
was 34 the whole 417?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
they'll be right at,
Yeah.
I mean, can we just go a little over capacity there? I mean, we've done it in a couple other instances.
Well, I don't think we need to. Do you?
I mean, if there's kids who can walk to the school and they're not going to school, I think we should.
Well, so you said those kids would all walk?
All the ones on Tomahawk Trail, Arrowhead, they would all walk. He just covered up my Apache Trail, Chelsea, Chatham, Buckingham, Trinity, Arrowhead, they would all walk. By the same token, where we've divided Rabbit Run is, I still think that's in pretty good walking distance as well.
So what do you say?
So, just brought up,
Just see what the numbers would be. Move those areas to Stonewall. Just as a thought exercise, can we just move those areas to Stonewall and see what it does to their numbers, how far over capacity it puts them?
all those students, the vast majority of those students that reside in 417 are currently going to Stonewall. This is the schools they're going to. Yes.
If we have kids who can walk to Stonewall, it makes sense to put them back in Stonewall and then go back to the other side of Man of War where we have the non-contiguous area that's already busing. They're going to be busing regardless, and maybe add a study area or two to the Clays Mill districts there.
I'll do that if that's what you want. If that's what the committee wants.
Aaron voted yes.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with the direction we're going here. We're re-litigating some stuff that we've already done. I want to try to fix that, the Walker's piece, the Stonewall and Rabbit Run, but I don't want to be redoing everything. I mean, every change we make has a consequence. And what I really have hoped that we would do tonight is figure out where we are on the free and us better numbers without redirecting all the work that we've done.
Somebody want to get started here?
I mean, I would like to look at the Mill Creek into Veterans Park area, that's possible, and then Lansdowne maybe into Southern, because the Lansdowne is 74, Southern is at 46.
If that's what our concern is, why aren't we looking at the higher numbers? If we talk about threshold maybe 80-20. I mean,
We have
is at 14, but
and we have Breckenridge at 84, we have Cassidy at 30, or we have Liberty at 41 and Breckenridge at 84, Yates at 77, Ashland at 52. I'm just throwing some out there for us. Just throwing them out there.
But are we thinking about having kids just swap and cross each other as they're going to school?
It sounds like to me.
I thought we had
No,
talked about.
well, I mean, Veterans Park is at Veterans Park is only at 86%. So none of those kids would have to come out. Well, I'm just talking about Mill Creek crossing the street. So
you're looking at the rate.
I'll just go ahead and say that Mill Creek, the high percentage of those students, free and reduced lunch, are going to be living near the school. So to move them, you're going to be taking them away from the school that they're walking to, mainly to Veterans Park.
The darker areas are those free and reduced lunch students.
Let me give a little bit more on this example, because this did exactly come up with the board in the past. Show the overlay, please, that has the current zone. See the blue area there of 5, 14, 15, 29, 30, 30, 531, and 532? See that blue area? That's known as Trent.
Yeah.
Trent Boulevard goes through that area. Many years ago, that was proposed to go into Veterans. At the same time, 615 was taken out of Veterans. 615 is in Mill Creek right now. And the Trent area is in Southern. And you all recognize that it probably shouldn't be in Southern. And a portion of that area, 514 and 529, can walk to Mill Creek. The remainder of the area is beyond walking distance. It requires a bus. They have to get in a bus to go somewhere. And it's been proposed that that go to Veterans. That was part of a previously approved board plan. It was never implemented because Veterans has stayed so close to capacity. Veterans has gone down a little bit, but we haven't done a redistricting like this since Veterans started going down a little bit. So, the genuine question is, do you want to put the bus portion, and maybe even the walking portion, but especially the 530, 31, 32, and 515? You want to put that bus portion in Veterans instead of 558, 60, or 563 walkers, or 615, who's already in Mill Creek. In particular, so the Trent versus
Would that be a
15.
fairly even trade in terms of capacity, 615 for this Trent area?
I think so.
But would it change our free and reduced numbers?
Possibly. Because that 615 is over in, it's on the opposite side of Man of War, which is in a different.
It will change your reduced
It
lunch.
will.
But it'll
What is the name?
number of
The
students.
time discussed was given, Mill Creek was at 77% free and reduced, but this number is at 70, so it's already down, not an insignificant amount.
And it'll change it on paper, but the majority of the families in that neighborhood don't send their kids to public school.
Which name?
The 615.
615. 615 is about 25 kids. 530, 31, and 32 is about 50, I think. 40. Well, at least in 2013. Scott could give a more exact figure for 2014.
Well, that would take
530, 31 and 32 are at 34 students. These 3 study areas. And 615
At 104%.
615 has 27 students. So it is almost a off.
We'll make that swap. Let's see what it looks like. Let's see what it does to the free and reduced. This is a suggestion we want to make.
But is that really what we want to do, is make these non...
The 515 could be included.
You want 515 also?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, those are those towns. I mean,
Alan, and they don't want to do it.
Since Bob, since that's been
That's Southern
an
right now.
experiment that you've done now for what, 10, 12 years with that, moving that portion of Mill Creek to veterans.
No, that portion,
It didn't get implemented.
It didn't. Well, no. The Trent Boulevard goes to another school.
They go to
It goes
Southern. They go to Southern.
Okay. And does Lisa and Bob, do your student achievement data, and I know we don't want names, but would we know that the students who live in that donut hole, have they performed better because they've been moved to a higher or less impoverished school?
They've been going to Southern for 15 years.
So,
And Southern is currently 69% free and reduced lunch. So that's not
What's the
poverty.
but I'm asking you about this. Do we know that the children living in Trent Boulevard who've been going to Southern for 15 years now, are they performing better than they were before or better than the others around Trent Boulevard? I just wonder if we know that by address.
We could look at that.
And that would show whether that experiment is making a difference.
Not a large sample, but yeah.
And that's not a low impoverished school either. Southern is not. Oh, and Southern is 69%, right? So it's not.
But the point of moving them out of Mill Creek to Southern was to move them from a more higher impoverished.
No, the reason they were put in Southern, there were a variety of reasons years ago. But the important thing was that about 6 years, actually about 12 years ago, it was proposed that they go to veterans, and that was never implemented. They haven't been in Mill Creek's area for a while for a variety of reasons.
As an outside observer, looking at this, well, it only does change Mill Creek 3%. It was at 70% prior to this of free and reduced. Now it's at 67, bringing in Veterans Park from 14% to 19%. Why would we just pick these 4 or 5 study areas, this area, to do that to? What stops us then from doing that to all the other schools just to get that balance a little better? Also, to me, Mill Creek and Veterans Park aren't the worst ones. Maybe we start with one that's closer, over 90%.
And that's a neighborhood. I mean, those kids all live in the same area, play on the same ball teams. I would hate to break them up and just have one little quadrant.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me why we would do this.
And we spend all kinds of time looking at not breaking up neighborhoods even today, and here we are going back and breaking up a neighborhood.
And that changes to what, 3%,
Right.
27 kids?
No, but this is a neighborhood that's used to being separated, correct?
Well,
They've always went to that neighborhood has always went to Southern together, and now they'll go to Veterans Park together. We haven't really broke them up.
But
And they're going to
the
a better
neighborhood's
school.
been divided, though, so why not unite it?
But I thought you didn't want to change people.
Because they're going to a better school.
Well, let's be careful using better school. I think we
Yeah.
obviously run into trouble with that.
A higher performing school?
Yeah.
So I think if that neighborhood has always been a neighborhood and they've been going to Southern together always, and now they're going to a higher performing school together, and they still live in the same neighborhood together, then you haven't broken them up.
But
And
you
you're
have
giving them a better
529,
opportunity.
514, 533, all those kids, all at the neighborhood, they all live together, play together, so you are breaking it up.
Which one?
All those surrounding areas, that whole
Hey,
Trent area.
But the whole Trent area, where that little blue, where that circle, they've always been separated from all the ones
And
around.
now you've broken it up even further. Now 529, 514, so you're literally picking 4 little sections out of there to put into a different school.
So what does it look like if you put the other two in Veterans Park?
Those kids walk.
They don't walk to Southern.
Right.
Okay.
Let's let them walk.
They can walk to Mill Creek.
They walk to Mill Creek.
I wouldn't, no. Why would
They can't, they are within walking distance of Mill Creek.
right, but they've always went to Southern.
Rather bus them, let them walk.
And they were proposed.
Go to Mill Creek. They walk to Mill Creek.
Just in our plan, as currently they don't. Currently they go to Southern. They only go to Mill Creek right now in our proposed plan. This doesn't exist yet, so nobody's ever walked in that circle anywhere.
So
In the last 15 years.
See, that's what I think this Scott, somebody in the district, because us as a committee, I don't think we can make these intricate changes without it being some kind of conflict. I mean, I know it might come to where it's conflict, but I think Scott with his objective eyes and, Bob with what he knows about the district, I think they can make those changes and bring it back to us, and we can look at it and see if that's, something that the committee wants to do. But I think us trying to pick and move study areas to try to balance it out, I don't think it's going to work.
I agree with that. I said I wasn't going to jump in, but I agree with it. It doesn't, it's just a constant roil. We pick and choose and try to mix and match. It's going to impact different things each time and undermine a lot of the work that we've done.
If we're going to do that, I mean, what
I mean, if there's a really strong, compelling, significant reason to do something, then we ought to consider it. But again, Lisa, I don't mean to minimize the impact of 3 or 4 or 5%, but we start over in a lot of areas for not much gain in what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, I think anytime a child can walk to school, they should walk to school. I mean, I don't care what socioeconomic status you are. The thought of my child being able to walk to school seems fabulous. And I think anytime a child can walk to school, gives them that privilege.
I think there's higher and bigger disparities than the one we're working on, spent 15 minutes on right now. I mean, we're looking at Arlington still, it's way over there. I mean, if we're going to do something, let's look at that. And again,
The other ones are going to be harder to change than this.
I agree. Just where they're located, I agree.
This is a case where they're only a mile or 2 apart.
Right.
So, and I'm not advocating this change, but I'm giving you the history of this has been proposed in the past. It just wasn't implemented, but it's...
And they were sent to Southern because they needed capacity at Southern?
I think at the time, actually, they went to Southern when Veterans opened. And so there were a lot of changes in total number of students at the time, and Veterans had more room, or excuse me, Southern had some room because Veterans had just been opened up. And it also worked with a feeder pattern proposal back then that didn't get implemented, and they were trying to balance things for a variety of reasons.
So do we need to make a motion for Scott to look at it and get back to us at the next meeting?
Well, I'm not clear yet what we're asking Scott to do.
Yeah, and we need to clarify that before we get off the phone here.
Right?
I promise I won't accuse you of butchering anything.
Okay.
What do we want Scott to do? I mean, we have to give him some parameters and some goals.
First of all, let me ask. We made 2 changes here, one to this area and one over to the Stonewall area. Do you want to keep those changes?
No, sit back.
I don't think so.
We're going to go back to where we were originally on C.
Yes.
Okay.
I thought we made this one thing.
Okay.
Rabbit.
Yeah.
Then
I would make the assumption, what Julie said, was if a kid can walk, he will walk. And we want all the walkers to go to the school where they walk. And I guess that's a mile, right?
You're going to have to look at a whole lot of study areas because I know like
Yeah,
557 and 560, or 556 and 557, all of that, they all walk to veterans. I mean,
that's what
that's
changed
like
we
a
found
mile.
that.
Yeah, there's more implications there than you realize. There's the whole area across that are currently slated to Southern that are across
Remember we did
Manowar.
the whole close to school thing, it didn't work.
My point
Why would we
is
bring that up?
there are a whole series of neighborhoods across Manowar that are slated for Southern that are within a mile of veterans.
Yeah.
And so that's just going to mess. I'm not sure that's the right parameters to use if it's within a mile.
Well, not for elementary centers. You're right.
Well, I thought you were saying that when he's trying to diversify the map. If he's trying to...
I mean, the problem with him trying to diversify,
Well,
look at William Wallace Brown and Harris.
Well, can I finish what I was saying? I'm sorry. If he's trying to diversify a map, I thought you were saying don't move a group that is walking to the school. Look at another group or another study area that he could possibly move to go to another school. Don't move anybody that's walking to the school. That's what I thought you were saying as a parameter as far as trying to
It's not what I was saying, but that makes better sense to me.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Did you hear that, Scott?
I did, and I agree with it.
Okay. Well, let's do that then. But what are we asking Scott to give us back? Ron?
It's going to be exceedingly difficult just given our conversation. I've just been absorbing it. We chewed on this for the whole 2 hours, and we have other principles we need to look at as well. But if there are some areas on the north side where there's 89, 94, 93, 94, 90% free and reduced lunch, and there are contiguous areas to them where there's 52%, 58%, 70%, 52%, 30%. If there's some tinkering at the margins that could be done in those downtown areas that would redistribute that somewhat to get those 90s down, that would be helpful. And it may be we look at it and we say, no, it's breaking neighborhoods up, it's doing whatever, but at least it would give us something to look at. And they are contiguous areas, so they shouldn't have huge transportation implications.
Okay. All right, I think that makes sense to me, Scott. Did you understand?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, I think that's fair, and let's take a look at it, see how it changes a free and reduced lunch, and then we'll compare it back to our original work on capacities and distance and that sort of thing. And we'll have to make some decisions next time as to whether it's worthwhile to consider those changes or not. Okay, that's a good stopping point. Apologize for going late tonight. We might, as you're doing your planning, the next few meetings, you might consider moving your dinner back 10, 15 minutes.
Dinner, what's that?
You're getting into my cocktail hour.
My cocktail hour is 24 hours.
Alan, just to confirm,
Yes,
since you have canceled, we are not...
Hang on, please.
Okay, so this committee is meeting next week, Tuesday,
Yes,
the 20th and the 22nd.
yes.
And then on the 27th, which we had hoped to be a public forum, but is now not going to be,
Right.
we would like to meet.
Yes.
29th?
Let's wait.
Let's decide that.
Keep it on your
Let's see if we're
calendar.
making better progress next.
I'm not available.
It's not
I'm
available.
sorry, what, Scott? He's not available.
I'm not available on the 29th.
There were a few folks who were unavailable on that 29th.
Okay.
That's why we walked away from it.
Okay, so Scott, we will not be meeting on the 29th, but you might want to go ahead and look at Tuesdays and Thursdays in February
Right.
for us.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
That way he can mark that down.